by Steve Hedley, the former RMT Assistant General Secretary. And Steve, I suppose, first of all, what would be your response to what Chris Philp was saying there, and indeed the Liz Truss campaign, that there should be a law to guarantee at least a minimum service on our railways?
Well, I think there should be a law to guarantee a minimum service from the government. I think it's very rich coming from a government that presided over the disastrous COVID policy in this country. We've seen more deaths than anywhere else in Europe, certainly. We saw this complete shutdown of Britain, not only for days, but for months at a time. So I think it's very rich coming from him. But the reality is this. If you ban people from striking, if you take away that human right to strike, people will strike anyway. They will strike unofficially. They'll do it outside the unions, like the Pentonville Vive done, like the National Shop Stewards Committee did. If people aren't allowed to strike to defend their living, because we've seen inflation go through the roof, we've seen living standards fall in real terms about 20%. People haven't had pay rises in 2 years, nearly 3 years. If people aren't allowed to do that through official channels, they'll take an unofficial route. So Liz Truss is giving red meat to the Tory party faithful. I mean, good luck there. I mean, I don't know who that non-entity was just running our campaign, but if he's what she's got to deal with, he's obviously rehearsed his speech very well. And the kindest thing you could probably say, it needs a bit more rehearsing.
Well, I'm just going to pick you up there on the COVID numbers, because, of course, it's now been 2 years since the start of COVID. The WHO has brought out its per-person numbers, and the UK, of course, wasn't the best in the world, but indeed the deaths per person were less than Germany, less than Spain, less than Italy, less than Belgium's, pretty much middle of the table if we're going to look at these developed countries. But on your point about people voluntarily walking out under a minimum service requirement, wouldn't this mean that then companies, as they're not allowed to do in many cases currently, they would be able to get in agency workers? People would then be able to go about their business, at least to a degree. Wouldn't that undermine the point of a voluntary strike?
Well, where are you going to get agency train drivers? Do you think you can just pick people off a tree and say, here, drive a train, or you get an agency guard or an agency signaller? These people have been trained for years and years to do their job safely and make sure the travelling public are safely. It's just another Tory kite that they're flying. The right wing of the Tory party seem to be trying to outdo each other and coming out with ludicrous ideas. Yeah, let's make everybody cross their own picket lines. Let's bring in agency workers who wouldn't have a clue what they're doing. Let them loose on the network and see what damage they can do. It just doesn't make any sense.
Now, lots of people might say that many people who work on the railways are remunerated to a pretty high degree. There are lots of high wages for particularly train drivers, many of them earning well above the average wage. And then there are many industries where pay rises simply aren't coming forward in many parts of the economy right now. Of course, the railways did receive billions upon billions of pounds to keep people in their jobs throughout COVID. I suppose the question is, what makes railway workers different from the rest of the economy who are undergoing a squeeze?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing makes us different. And what we have to do is generalise the strike wage. We need a national strike, because what we have at the minute is the biggest redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich. The billionaires and the trillionaires are taking an ever-increasing proportion of the national wealth, and we've got to reverse that trend. Now, we have MPs coming on here who voting themselves big pay rises every year, voting themselves pay rises. And we've had, as union members, not just us on the railway, but public service workers, the people that were clapped by the Tories every Wednesday night. We were all clapped and told what a great job we were doing. These people have had below inflation pay rises for more than a decade now. People have lost, in the NHS, for example, people have lost about a third of their wages. And it can't go on, because what happens is that you can't recruit to these essential industries. You can't recruit to these essential services. So we have to have a redistribution of wealth, not from the poor to the rich, but from the rich to the poor. And I find it, absolutely shocking when the FTSE 100 companies, the top 100 companies in the FTSE, have increased their profits by 70% from during the COVID period. We have the proliferation of billionaires and trillionaires. And somehow we're told that ordinary workers can't have a pay rise in line with inflation. And if you don't have a pay rise that at least meets inflation, you're in fact having a pay cut in real terms.
Do you know a single person who's getting a pay rise in line with inflation? You're right that MPs got a pay rise in April this year, but their pay rise was 3%. That's against an inflation backdrop of double digits. So in effect, that is a pay cut as well.
3% of what?
3% of just over £80,000 a year, which is a huge wage, of course. But equally, there are many train drivers who earn about £80,000 a year. There are many train drivers, particularly if they pick up working on Sunday shifts and elsewhere, that earn far more than £80,000 a year.
Well, for start off, train drivers, by and large, are in a different union from mine. They're in the ASLEF union, they're not in the RMT union. Most of the people we represent are on an average wage of about £24,000. Many in the cleaning grades and the catering grades are on a lot less money than that. They have to rely on overtime to actually make ends meet. Some of our people, even are in full-time employment, have to claim benefits because they haven't got enough money to pay the rent. So why should we be subsidising bad employers, who you quite rightly pointed out were given billions of pounds by the government, somewhere around the region of £20 billion, and £2 billion of that went straight to their shareholders who didn't lift a finger during COVID. They sat at home and picked up their dividends. So why should working class people have to pay the bill when everybody else, the higher echelons of management and the shareholders, are picking up the money?
Now, Steve Hedley, we do have just 1 minute left in this conversation, but I do want to get your views on what has been going on within the Labour Party at the moment. Of course, the Shadow Transport Minister, Sam Tarry, being fired by Sir Keir Starmer for turning up to a picket line and giving media interviews. What's your reaction to that?
Well, look, we all know what Starmer is. Starmer's an absolute snake. He's got no point of him trying to lead a party that says it's representing workers. But what I would say about Starmer, he's not crossed the picket line himself. He's not crossed the picket line, and that can't be said for some so-called trade union leaders out there. So when people are criticising Starmer, and I do criticise Starmer, by the way, I think he's appalling. I think they have to look in the mirror themselves and ask themselves if they crossed the picket line.